biracial man, and interacting with others. And then also talking about some of the social inequities, being able to point out some of the inequalities that we see on campus, some of the inequalities that we see in society at large. And then we'll get specifically to talk about the skills that are needed for interacting effectively with folks of color and how that looks in terms of equity and inclusion. So again, I'm not just trying to say, look at me, this is who I am. This is important for this research. This is important for us as mental health therapists to really take a look at our own cultural identities and how they impact our work in individual settings, how they impact our work in outreach and different social justice movements that we're a part of. So myself, you'll hear me interchange between calling myself Black, African American, biracial today, just because those are all the different identities and the ways that I identify. I probably will not necessarily just say I'm a white American, although I have strong Italian heritage, partially because the racial identity development model that I use is largely influenced by the way that the world interacts with me. So phenotypically, physically, walking down the streets of LA, even in Orange County, people aren't necessarily going to look, oh, your great-grandparents immigrated from Italy. They're going to interact with me as a Black man, and how that then impacts my safety at times and how that impacts the work that I do. As a first-generation college student, it was really difficult trying to navigate the system, trying to navigate the academy. So that's why that's there. Speaking specifically as a cisgender heterosexual male, it's important for me to highlight that when we get into the specifics of the Black Lives Matter movement and the origins there. Middle class background and the advanced educational degrees that I have, I feel particularly as an African American man who's had the great opportunity to get a PhD, it's important that I continue to utilize that and use that responsibility to serve the community. I'll go briefly. These are the professional affiliations I want to share today, largely because I advocate for a holistic approach to social justice and for advocacy in general. So everything from being the social media coordinator at our counseling center to working as a male advocate for the Soul Sisters organization. It's a women's empowerment organization up in the Bay Area. A lot of great work, everything from makeovers to connecting teenage mothers to social workers, everything under the sun. Also working as the hip-hop artist and actor Commons summer youth camp director. A lot of powerful work with the kids from the south side and west side of Chicago, taking them to camp up in Wisconsin. And then a choir that I used to be a part of, doing their team building a little bit more. So getting into media, I want to show you all an example, and as we get into the pictures here, has anyone seen these pictures before? Do we remember what these pictures are from? Just go ahead and, if you do know, shout them out. If not, that's fine. Katrina, okay. I've given this presentation a couple times, and this is actually the first group that said that, so keep yourselves around. That's true. Oh, okay. So recent, yeah, okay. So before we get into the next slide, what are some of the differences that we see between the top picture and the bottom picture? And you can just go ahead and shout them out. The type of clothing, what the people are carrying, anything, what they look like, just different guesses even. Top person, what? I'm sorry? Alone, okay. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, it is a garbage bag. The kind of being far away, but the top, the person up top does have a garbage bag and a couple different items in tow as well. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, not necessarily knowing the particular racial ethnic makeup, but I think at least having a little bit darker skin tone, we can say. From what I can tell in the picture and what I've seen, I guess over the years in media coverage, I think it is a younger individual. Yeah. Alrighty. So, think about yeah, we're good. As we transition to the next slide, think about this in terms of not just you and your own worldview, how you are viewing and experiencing these pictures, but also as a mental health therapist, if these people are coming in after they're portrayed in the media, or people who look like them are portrayed in the media, how that's going to affect your therapy with them. So again, somewhat similar experiences in a general framework, but in terms of how it was actually covered, a couple points that I want to highlight here. So a young man, as we're talking about youth and age, a young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after, and I highlighted here, looting a grocery store in New Orleans back in 2005. Then, again, kind of really similar situation. 2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda. Do we see how this can impact and decrease the likelihood of black folks coming in for mental health services? If I'm being criminalized and demoralized as a young black man from a system, why am I going to go to trust folks who have historically tried to criminalize me, who have historically tried to harm me? Anything else that's popping up in terms of the little stars here? So we see like in the bottom, we see that there's an average of 257 votes that highlight 4 stars, as opposed to the top, again, more of the criminal activity of the looting as an action verb there. No stars, no votes, no support, basically. And nothing is that different from both of these. Yes, we see someone up top with a trash bag, and who knows the origin of the items, but I think, again, we see these sorts of images time and time again, and that this isn't anything new. So these next 2 images, I really want to put out a disclaimer. I don't have any Photoshop skills. I don't have any Photoshop training or background. I just really want us to look at the different types of verbiage that's on this young brother's sign, when you'll see why in a second. So, sign in the middle, for those who may not be able to see: no mother should have to fear for her son's life every time he robs a store. So, if you, like myself, kind of like, wow, what's going on here? What is this sign actually saying? Why would someone try to be advocating for that? So, from all the intents and purposes, the research and the pictures and the reviews that I was able to find highlighted that this picture was photoshopped from the original picture to kind of demoralize the young brother there. So what we see in the original picture: no mother should have to fear for her son's life every time he leaves home. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, and then hashtag Stay Human. So the projection here, what we're seeing is that this picture was delegitimized as being true. Everyone was saying that this has to be what the person actually said, because why would a black man why would he try to advocate for something like this when we know in reality that it's something more like this? So we see that time and time again, and the different narratives that get shared, the different types of folks who have positions of power to really advocate like that. So it's not just necessarily an understanding kind of the duality of public perception. So it's not just necessarily how the media is delivered, but also how the media is received. So it's not just necessarily about people's intentions from media outlets. It's about how the media and how the narrative is actually being received by folks, both within the black community and outside the black community. And when we do see the narrative being shared, it's mostly focusing on trauma and crisis. It's not necessarily about positive experiences. It's not necessarily as often about just growth and development. It's more about the victimization, the criminalization, the ghettoization, all those sorts of things. So as a result, a lot of times when I'm doing outreach, we on campus, in the communities, in LA, wherever, you're hearing a lot of things about, well, therapy won't work. This isn't something for me. This isn't something that my people do. And that's largely attributed to the way that folks are portrayed in the media and how their image is out there. So one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is just being in APA Division 46, looking specifically at media psychology and technology. One of the awards that the division offers is the Golden Psy Award, just highlighting the means of recognizing excellence in the fictional portrayal of mental health professionals. So everything from in treatment, any in treatment fans? No? Oh, just one? All right. So from that to SVU, Special Victims Unit, those sorts of things. It's imperative, I feel, for our field to be able to create our own narrative, not just as mental health professionals, but mental health professionals from communities of color as well. This is somewhat, I guess, kind of represented in the antithesis of Gary Busey. So what we've seen over the last couple months, Amazon's Fire Stick. Gary Busey is made out to be the stereotypical crazy person really yelling and carrying on about how the Fire Stick is so amazing. But from what I've seen, Gary Busey having a TBI has affected his executive control. So being able to talk about mental health and say, well, that's not necessarily as supportive for folks who have had TBIs and their executive control is severely impacted. And then you look at the intersection of that with other marginalized identities, and that just continues to create a divide for folks seeking mental health services. So this is an example of, I think when we're talking about a replication model, an example of a type of poem that someone could write. It's an example of a spoken word piece, if you will, and just a lot of different emotion and rhyme scheme there. So, if they gunned me down, how would you mourn my death? If they snuffed me out, took my last breath, would you fight and shout, or say I'm to blame for the bullet in my chest? How will their sins be absolved if they don't even see or want to see a problem to be solved? So being able to connect in individual settings, in community settings, different outreaches that we all do on a regular basis, to connect with language, to connect with emotion, and any other way that we can so that students, so that folks in the community feel safe, heard, and recognize that they have a voice. So as we're getting specifically to the mental health section, I want to highlight two specific instances here. So I'm sure we're all somewhat familiar with Tuskegee. Yes, I don't have to go into much detail with that. So for over 40 years in the not so distant past, the U.S. government intentionally gave African American men syphilis in rural Alabama and told that they were receiving free health care from the U.S. government. And the reason why I highlight this is because this is an instance of what folks have called a healthy level of cultural paranoia. So being able to recognize that when folks are coming in and saying, well, I don't trust you as a health provider, I don't trust even my medical doctor, it's instances like this. And this isn't something that's wrong or fictional. Like, this actually happened not too long ago, and how this has continued to be portrayed in those different examples of media like I was talking about earlier. I also think that there's a level of mistrust, so I can speak as from personal experience as an anecdote here. So growing up, I didn't know any mental health therapists. I didn't know anyone in clinical psychology, social work, anything like that. And that anecdote is pretty common for folks in communities of color. So when we're looking at training programs, when we're looking at recruiting for graduate school programs, we need to do a better job of recruiting and helping young folks of color matriculate through programs to be able to enter the field, so that we can then decrease that divide to be able to provide services for folks who are requesting to speak or requesting to enter treatment with someone with a shared racial ethnic background. So specifically from the JED Foundation 2013 nationwide sample, we're looking at 2/3 of students who will need mental health services will actually follow through. The number one reason from NAMI in 2012, the year before, the number one reason why folks didn't is because of stigma. And the stigma about being able to access, or what that would actually mean for them to access mental health services. That's made further complex for folks in communities of color. So as a field, and what one of the videos I have coming up next is from the Vice Chancellor Irvine, Dr. Thomas Parham. He talks a lot about psychology as a profession is not necessarily as well respected as a lawyer, as a medical doctor, those sorts of things. And again, that talks about the reason for needing to recruit students of color. Again, specifically, a large portion of folks in these in communities of color don't necessarily know a psychologist, so that divide is that much greater. There's also a higher chance for a severe diagnosis, and medication being one of the leading treatment choices. So there's not much option there in terms of psychotherapy. There's more of a direct connection to getting them medicated, getting them out the door. Hence why we see a lot of different MMPI, schizophrenia scales being higher, is because we don't necessarily assess for that as well. So again, one of the pieces of work that I'm doing is trying to create more of a educational field and combining that with some social media. So I was able to interview Dr. Thomas Parham a while back, and I would just want to play a quick 2-minute clip from that interview, and then we can talk more about that. If this works. Not my iTunes, there we go. So Dr. Parham, I also really think it's important that we spend some time being able to talk about the importance of destigmatizing mental health services.
For sure.
Not just in a professional sense and increasing services, increasing access, but for the general public, trying to destigmatize different myths and destigmatize the folklore about going to see a professional for mental health.
What's interesting about that when we talk about the folklore, there's a general perception, I think, in society, so let's start contextually, where we live in a world that is kind of survival of the fittest, rugged individualism, so people ought to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. So even though it is natural part of the human condition to be able to have this, what I would call interdependence on one another, people are socialized out of being kind of naturally human into spaces where they feel like they have to stand on their own 2 feet, and asking for any kind of help, support, assistance somehow connotes somebody who is weak, unprepared, or somehow just being inappropriate when it comes to what we call dependence or interdependence. So part of destigmatizing mental health, part of really listening to that folklore, is to do our best to try to explode those myths and remind people that in fact it is the most authentically human thing you can do to be able to ask for help and ask for assistance and to depend on your brother or sister to be able to engage in that particular space. So I don't think that we're as good at that as psychologists, but I think we need to get better at that even for this contemporary generation of folk who are there to take advantage of the services that we have.
So anything in particular that jumps out for people? Anything that he offered really resonate with anyone? Yeah. To be able to seek mental health services is one of the most authentic things we can do. Right? To be able to ask for help, yeah. Mm. Absolutely. Anything else stood out for people, or maybe questions about the brief interaction there? Oh, she wants to. She going to jump in? All right. So, as we've talked about how social media portrays black bodies, how we've talked about mental health and the history of mistrust, specifically within the black community, I want to transition to the Black Lives Matter movement and to specifically highlight the fact that it's not a moment, it's not something that's a fad, or it's not something that's just going to be here today, gone tomorrow. This is a movement and something that we've already seen made some pretty significant change. So the reason why I wanted to highlight who created hashtag Black Lives Matter is because, well, that's on the next slide, so let me not jump too far ahead of myself. In 2013, after George Zimmerman was acquitted for Trayvon Martin's death, these three sisters were able to come together to create this movement that we're seeing really come to the forefront of the political presidential race right now. And I just want to read this quick excerpt. So, Black Lives Matter is an ideological and political intervention in a world where black lives are systemically and intentionally targeted for demise. It is an affirmation of black folks' contributions to this society, our humanity, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. And while we're maybe specifically thinking of police brutality, let's not forget Jim and Jane Crow. Let's not forget other legalized ways that we see black bodies being able to be harmed legally. And that's the source. I can send that to you all if you really want. Oh, sisters. I'm sorry. I didn't code switch properly there. Yeah. Sisters. Spelled S-I-S-T-A-H. Sisters. All right, there we go. Thank you. Oh, you're right. They're not yet. So, you're right. Maybe next time I should have pictures there, huh? Okay. So if you adapt Black Lives Matter, if you're using that in any other hashtag, in any other way, use the opportunity to talk about its inception and political framing. Lift up black lives as an opportunity to connect struggles across race, class, gender, nationality, sexuality, and disability. And the reason I'm doing this not just to properly cite the author like we're taught in grad school and my training director sitting in the back of the room, but to also be able to intentionally cite this to not co-opt the voice of black queer women's work. And I think we've seen this hashtag become popularized because social media is trendy. Social media is a fad that way. But to talk about the political framing and the intentionality of this actual movement is why I'm highlighting that. I think I'm wanting to highlight this just based off of different reactions of potential gender bias. So what we've seen portrayed in the media, unfortunately more times than not, is that a lot of black boys and black men are gaining the media attention. And we're not seeing sisters highlighted as often. We're not seeing black women being as given as much time to be covered, their stories being told. We're also not seeing specifically about black transgender women having their narratives or their anecdotes being able to be shared. So that's why I wanted to highlight that. And again, just briefly, this is important for our clinical and outreach work. So a lot, and I'm doing this bullet point by bullet point, because in the past when I've talked about this, at the end there's all the questions about all lives matter. There's a lot of discussion about, the unfortunate killings of police, blue lives matter, those sorts of things. So I want to do this bullet point by bullet point so we're all able to follow along here. So yes, it should be obvious that all lives matter, because all lives do matter. We good so far? All right. But history has shown us time and time again that this divine truth is not practiced when there are countless forms of systematic, institutional, and structural forms of discrimination, oppression, and yes, racism. So the problem lies when these forms of oppression, grounded in a white, privileged, heterosexist, patriarchal narrative, intentionally aim to discount, discredit, and devalue people of color, specifically in this case, black lives. Still good? 3 bullet points down? All right. So yes, when you're dealing with all this and trying your best just to wake up in the morning, to go to work and or school, we need to remind everyone and bring specific attention to the fact that black lives matter. We good? So this isn't a movement that's about excluding anyone. This is a movement in its very origin, in its very nature, is about inclusion. And while the hashtag may appear to be specific to a particular population, to a particular cultural group, by nature it's inclusion. It's about a spirit of inclusion. So as we're talking about social media, as we've seen a lot of police brutality, whether we're talking about Sandra Bland, whether we're talking about Eric Gardner, we also need to not forget, because I think a lot of people are looking at social media and cameras and footage being something that just randomly kind of magically appeared in the last couple of years. But I grew up in LA, and I don't know if anyone else grew up in LA, but I remember about 24 years ago, there was a brother named Rodney King, and we saw his footage, right? That was before Mark Zuckerberg, that was before Twitter, that was before Instagram, all of that. In the same way that Eric Gardner was murdered, in the same way that Sandra Bland was murdered. So it's important that we, and I don't have legal training, just in case anyone at home is going to be watching this. I don't have legal training, but I think it's important that everyone know your rights, so that it's perfectly legal to be able to film cops at work in all 50 states. The little bit at the bottom says, recording cops openly in a public place, as long as it doesn't physically interfere with their ability to do their job, is your constitutional right. Now, am I advocating that you actually do this? That's up to you to decide. So these are our rights, and part of the reason why we've seen so much national attention recently is because social media has been able to share this in a very viral way, in a way where Rodney King, that was shared across news outlets, but not as quick and not as viral that way. So where do we go from here? Where do we actually take steps to fight injustice? Where do we actually go moving forward? So in terms of the action items, in terms of the replication model, just as examples of what we're doing at UC Irvine, my year of internship, so again 2013 to 14, I was able to create a group called Wabruta. And say it with me one time, because everyone always like, what? So, okay, Wabruta? All right. So that's Swahili for brotherhood. And during one of the first meetings, we were able to create a mission statement. So utilizing, we all have, group facilitation skills, being able to create a mission statement for them. So not one, do they feel like they have a strong sense of identity, but they have, two, a very specific purpose for what they're there to do. So being unified and sharing in a sense of camaraderie as black men, to be able to reinforce the positive images through trust, loyalty, commitment, and community engagement. The really powerful thing for me over the last 2+ years has been able to see the mentor relationships of the older brothers being able to then take more of a mentoring role for the up and coming freshmen and sophomores. So it's not just necessarily a top-down hierarchical kind of structure, but more of a flat organizational structure for peer-to-peer mentoring relationships. In terms of what you could potentially cover in a group like this, looking at educational, psychological, social, and developmental needs. One of my mentors over the years and throughout graduate school was the godfather of black psychology, Dr. Joseph White. Being able to work with him for this group that I started for the first time during graduate school at Illinois. And in his work in 2009, optimal growth and identity solidification occurs when individuals are allowed to express and reflect. So we don't see too many times where black men are specifically given a space where they're encouraged to be vulnerable and encouraged to be honest, to cry. So being able to talk about everything from healthy relationships, to be able to talk about gender identity, to be able to talk about sexual identity, all these different pieces of who we are, and allowing these brothers to be able to express and reflect is really powerful. So some additional underpinnings for a group like this, we are asking 2 different questions. So now that I know who I am, what route do I want to take for myself? What route do I want to make for myself? And 2, what are my responsibilities to myself and to my community? So not just thinking about our responsibilities from an individual standpoint, but who we are as a community and how we can help each other out. Irvine, also the Counseling Center, also partners with the Black Student Union, the BSU, to be able to attend their weekly meetings. Historically, just so happens to be during week 5. So decades ago, the group started with Marvin Gaye's song, "What's Going On?" We have kind of moved away from that just because, oh, Milo, you're too corny, da-da-da. But being able to actually start each, and we, again, meet once a quarter during week 5, so 3 times total throughout the year. Being able to recite Dr. Wade Noble's "Standing in the River." One of the takes and one of the messages that I received from the song is a call for intergenerational alliance and activism. So yeah, this is really painful for me to say, but I'm not as young as I used to be as an undergrad. And recognizing that some students may see me as part of the establishment, some students may see me as being part of the system. And whether or not they do, being able to recognize that I myself have different experiences from them, to be able to value and hear their experiences. And not just myself, but other facilitators that we've had throughout the years. Just another point to highlight, this is for men and for women in the black community altogether. One of the most interesting moments, I think, for me during my year of postdoc. So back in end of November, beginning of December, when the lack of indictment happened for Officer Wilson, Dr. Tamkin, right here, and myself, we, with the help of Student Affairs, were able to kind of publicize a group that we wanted to offer for students and staff on the UCI campus. No particular racial ethnic background, just students and staff, because we recognize all folks have been affected by this. And we were very intentional in our advertising and marketing. It was kind of a day of operation, so we were just sending out different email blasts and all that kind of stuff. We were very intentional about saying that there's not going to be any press, that there's not going to be any cameras or social media. And the reason we wanted to do this is because it was a very dangerous time for a lot of folks in Orange County. It was a very unsafe time for a lot of them, myself included. So we highlighted the fact, Dr. Tamkin and myself, that we're not legally trained, but for folks who felt like they wanted to protest, we offered them free legal services, just kind of websites, phone numbers, that sort of thing. And the reason why I was saying earlier that it was one of the most interesting moments of my postdoc years because we actually somehow garnered support from Fox News. And when I say support, I mean completely the contrary. So we were, I guess, kind of villainized for the fact that we offered this, and they interviewed someone who was saying the fact that these folks could be potentially psychologically harmed from thousands of miles away was really pushing the envelope, and that we were trying to really propagate this false narrative about the incident in Ferguson having racial undertones. And that, I was just, man, I'm just trying to get my postdoc hours. Bill O'Reilly, no thank you. So anyway, it really got into the discussion about how the media is portraying black men and women and how that serves as a deterrent for those seeking mental health services. So this particular dialogue that we offered then transitioned into an ongoing group comprised of everyone across campus, and just different dialogues that came from that, different programming activities. Is really powerful to see all of that. Just a couple other action items here. Outreach via peer programs. At the Counseling Center Irvine, we have 3 different peer programs with a strong emphasis on diversity, all types of diversity, not just about racial and ethnic diversity. I think it's also important that we shift the paradigm from why should I seek services, and not only talking about going to see a mental health professional when something is wrong, when it's already after the fact. So for those who think in outreach terms, secondary and tertiary outreach models, but more of a primary sort of approach there. Specifically saying that mental health is greater than and more significant in talking about that in those terms, and saying something is a mental illness, because we all have mental health just like we all have physical health. Sometimes we have different concerns and challenges, yes, but that's not just something specific to mental health, that's physical health as well. So talking about it in those terms could be helpful. Another organization that I was able to partner with, I think towards the end of internship, beginning of postdoc last year, was Black and Brown People Vote, just using different hashtags. I think one was Yes We Vote, to be able to get the word out. The site offers voter registration. You're able to put in your zip code, phone number, those sorts of things, so you can get registered right on the site. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is because I think it's important that we encourage students to start thinking about change in terms of policy. We saw a pretty significant change in Ferguson's makeup of city council, police chief, for a community that was actually predominantly African American. And then once people were able to vote and to change that makeup, they were actually able to have more of a voice at the table to change policy that way. And then lastly, just engaging in student government at any level, whether that's directly going to your student body president, whether that's going to different ad hoc groups, but really recognize the importance of student government that way. So here are a couple references, more references, and just to go green, I didn't necessarily want to print out presentation notes. But I would be more than happy to share with anyone and everyone. There's my email there. Just send me a note, and I can attach the presentation. I can't add the video just because the file is too big, but we can talk about it over the phone or whatever the case may be. So that's that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or to kind of have a dialogue, discussion with folks, what everyone's doing at your various campuses, those sorts of things. Or any other spellings of SISTA I need to add there.
No, let me clarify that. I don't know that everyone knows that you were saying they were black women.
Yes.
Or
No,
they
you're.
were related to each other.
Oh, I see. No, I totally get it. Yeah. Yes, yes. All right. Um, questions, comments, concerns? Yeah.
Potentially be an entirely separate presentation in and of itself. I
Okay.
appreciate that you touched on advocacy as the myriad of opposing sort of viewpoints to any of the issues that you brought forth today. And I
Mhm.
wonder if you have a sense of personal or professional best practices in engaging with those types of folks,
Mm.
dealing with issues of fertility and, you know, all the complex dynamics that we encounter in that kind of interaction.
Mm. That is a
Like I said, entirely
yeah.
separate
That's a
presentation.
lot. Yeah. Um.
I don't know the answer. That's why I'm maybe it's
Well, I think one, just understanding the different identities that we as mental health professionals. So obviously my own cultural identities, but also understanding my position at that point and still now as a trainee in a larger counseling center, and the counseling center then positioned on a UC campus, and how that then can have ripple effects throughout the UC community and everything. So I'm highlighting that because there's different levels and layers to all of that, and how you may naturally want to respond. I think me as Milo probably wanted to respond differently from me as Dr. Dodson. So understanding where you're positioned in whatever system you may be, I think, is important. In terms of larger best practices, um, I'm open to suggestions on that. I mean, I think it's, in all seriousness, is a really, really important question, and it's one I think that deserves ongoing attention. But um, that's definitely a larger presentation. So, all right, we're just gonna hang out and do spoken word, or oh yeah.
There's so much in what you're saying, and there's so many ways you can think about it. So I think
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as far as in my mind, for such a UCSF probably
Mm-hmm.
something wrong
Mm.
that what you do about it.
just reminding my colleague that this is a recorded presentation.
Sorry,
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
that's a sad comment that needs to be addressed. I don't, I don't see it. I see it getting worse rather than better.
Mm.
So when I counsel after preparedness,
Mm-hmm.
I think, what's it like to be alone on campus, you and your buddy?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a, how do you go on? How do you make use of something that has such minimal amount of
Yeah.
issues of, like for me, I'm an old guy, I have no idea what a hashtag is. You know what I mean?
Mm. Okay.
Honest with you, I have no, I know it has something to do with politics. You know,
Mm.
I don't know what it is.
I apologize. I skipped over that part. Yeah.
So there's that problem. That's my problem.
Sure.
How do I relate to my students when they're doing things
Oh. So. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
you know, I go on, it stirs all sorts of thought and reaction.
Mm.
You know, racism is a
Mm.
I
Mm. Right. No, so just in terms of how we can, and I don't think that's necessarily just an issue at UCSF. I think that's colleges and universities. And the reason why I say that is because I think it's important to take a holistic approach to addressing that, not just at the collegiate level, but you're looking at outreach to middle schools, you're looking at outreach to high schools, so that you can increase those numbers, not just to one particular school or college, university, UC, Cal State, private, wherever. I think that's a systemic thing, country or nationwide. In terms of the hashtag, so a hashtag is used as a it's used as a tool that allows you to be able to search for things more efficiently and quicker, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter. So, for example, if I wanted to pull up all the news articles from today that highlighted Black Lives Matter, I would do hashtag Black Lives Matter, and that then automatically does a search for me so that it only pulls up things that use that particular hashtag. So whether I'm talking about hashtag water bottle or hashtag foodie, different things that we're seeing. It's a internet social media thing across all platforms. Yeah. Yes.
So, with the recent events of past year,
Mm.
there were some of us that are council members that wanted to make a statement on our website, expressing our outrage and support for students. But we got some pushback from the administration that they didn't, there was some political issue that they were wary of then offending other student groups, etc. And I was just wondering, actually kind of what your thoughts were about that and how you might respond to administration, but I'm also curious about, for those of you in this room, how did your campuses respond? What did you do or not do publicly in response to these events? Don't all be yelling at once.
So I'm on UC Davis, and I don't think our Wilson Center sent out any statements, but because of my role, I'm also part of the Wilson Center on campus, Asian American Studies Department, and our Wilson Center put out statements, and they got backlash from the student affairs administration regarding it. And I think what it came down to for staff was, what's important for our integrity. Knowing that we do take these risks because of our disabilities. I think we were able to, I think our administration was willing to listen, but I think what they would have liked was maybe a heads up that this is something we were just going to be out. Because they would have to deal with any real, really questions from their supervisors and stuff. But that was kind of what my experience was.
Dr. Diaz?
So I'll just add, so I'm a training director, so I'm part of the ASSA, which is the Association for Council Center Training Agencies, and a lot of other training centers or council centers across the country put out general statements, so not specific to what has happened, but saying, there's a lot of things happening nationally that you might find yourself feeling triggered around just climate, and so there were general statements that sort of reminded
think that speaks to how powerful visibility is, not just for your own, as a theme of today's keynote, self-care, but also to be able to actually engage students who don't necessarily traditionally utilize counseling services, primarily because we're seen as part of a system that hasn't served them well in the past. So if we go out as people, if we go out and engage them on in their humanity, then we're able to increase numbers that way, and on all different forms of outreach. Hmm.
I want to add something.
Yeah.
So I'm a UC Irvine, and I felt really lucky to have had a chance to sit with staff members, and they asked me, so, Vivian, how are you doing?
Mm.
And I'm
Mm.
like, I'm bad, damn it. That's how I'm doing. And other people asking me, so, what can I do to support you? How can I be here for you? And for me, that was absolutely fantastic. The other piece of what I want to share is that in terms of drafting a response of some kind, that was something that had been generated in discussions as well. And my stance was this: what I did for students at UC Irvine, I will do it again, and I am not going to justify my actions in having a forum of students come together, faculty and staff, to talk about their feelings. And so therefore, I was of the position at that time, and still am, I don't want to push trouble. I don't do that. However, if I'm asked to support a student body of others, I will do that within my parameters. And I personally won't, especially when I feel as though I need to create a response that says, I chose to do X, Y, or Z because of this. Other than it being about protecting the emotional and social well-being of the students on campus who were impacted by that lack of indictment in person and subsequent experiences and events to them. So obviously, again, I felt blessed as a Black female psychologist at UC Irvine to have people rally around me. And Milo, I think I might share the same kind of experience too, in
Mhm.
terms of being supported. That was great for me. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I think my experience as a black male trainee was particularly helpful and supported. One, I felt a little bit isolated in kind of the backlash that we got on such a national level. Like I said, I was just trying to get my postdoc hours. But to actually have the support from staff, to be able to have the support from the campus community, being able to come up to me on a very personal level, I did feel really blessed to have that. I recognize that unfortunately that's not a universal thing that happens for everyone in all different training programs. So to be able to have that at Irvine was really, really special for me. And to be honest, not have to go through it alone. I think to be able to have the support of um, another black psychologist, another black mental health professional was really powerful for me, and still is. So, yeah. Hmm. Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Mhm. Mm. Yeah, it's frustrating. Yes. No, I think just you. Yeah.
So just to add, my statement as far as management thing, I recognize that it's not just management, it's a part of the systemic issue. And I do take ownership, I would encourage all of us to take ownership in that if there is something that we want to speak about within our agency, please find us to do it instead of waiting for that other person to do it. All of us, I'm guilty of it myself. But I'm guilty of it.
Ah.
And I'm acknowledging my own part in that and just encouraging us all to do that. Because that is how we will which we do it in our community.
All righty. Well, thank you very much.